There's a lot of talk around training for specific muscle fiber types, particularly it's about targeting fast twitch muscle fibers. But is there any scientific backing around this type of training? Does it even matter? And did you know that you can do absolutely nothing to maximize fast twitch muscle fiber type ratio? I'm gonna take you through the science behind all of this muscle fiber type training, how you can benefit from it and use it in a practical sense to be able to potentially target fast twitch muscle fibers, become a more explosive fighter. So before we do that, down in the description, first link in the comment as well, the MMA Strength Conditioning Blueprint that is free. Covers everything you need to know about strength conditioning for MMA and how you can implement it into your own training. But I've got my computer in front of me here because I've got a lot of notes. I also covered some of this on the solo podcast I did not too long ago. So make sure you check out the Sweet Science Fighting podcast channel or on Spotify, etc. as well. But let's start with muscle fiber types and what they are. So typically you will know we have fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. Type 1 are your slow oxidative or slow twitch muscle fibers. Then we have type 2, which are your fast twitch muscle fibers. That's typically split, and when we're talking about pure muscle fibers, type 2A and type 2X. Also known as type 2B in the past, but is now known as type 2X. Type 2X are your fastest contracting muscle fibers. Type 2A are still fast, just not as fast, but are able to last longer. They don't fatigue as fast as type 2X. We also have hybrid fibers. They're not talked about as often, but we tend to have fibers in between all of these pure fibers. So pure fibers, type 1, type 2A, type 2X. Then we have hybrid fibers. Type 2.1/2A, we have type 2A/2X. So there are hybrid fibers within these, and you don't just have pure fiber makeups. So in terms of the order of contraction velocity, we're going type 1, then type 1/2A, type 2A, type 2A/2X, then type 2X. That is the spectrum. Now type 2X may contract up to 8 to 10 times faster than type 1, hence why everyone is throwing a lot of importance into trying to train these muscle fibers so you can become a faster and more powerful combat athlete. It's also why there's such an emphasis on training fast twitch muscle fibers and not doing too much slow endurance training, which can potentially start to shift you towards slower forms of muscle fibers. So these muscle fibers are known as myosin heavy chains. And within a muscle, we have a thick and thin filament. That is the actin and myosin filament. Essentially, they cross over. So you think about thick and thin filaments kind of like this as my little crude illustration within this video. And they have these cross bridges that attach together, and that's how the muscle contracts. Now, people with a larger proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers are able to produce more force and power during movements. Kind of makes sense, right? They have muscle fibers that can contract faster, so they're able to produce that force faster. It's one of the reasons we find that elite sprinters have high proportions of fast twitch muscle fibers, and endurance athletes have a high proportion of slow twitch muscle fibers. Now, the question becomes, is it the training that got them like that, or were they genetically predispositioned for those certain sports? I would probably say a lot of it comes down to genetic predisposition. Some people are just greater fast twitch muscle fiber makeup or greater slow twitch. They gravitate to those sports they're good at, and the training just layers on top of that to further push their muscle fiber type that they're already dominant in. However, back to muscle fiber type and muscle fiber type shifting, because we have this idea that just because you are made up of a certain type of muscle fiber doesn't mean that we cannot shift muscle fiber type to either faster or slower phenotypes. Again, we're not going to get pure changes from type 2X to type 1, but we can gradually shift some of that continuum to be more fast or slow twitch. As I mentioned, you're probably not going to see pure type 1 to pure type 2X or vice versa, but you may see a lot of shifting between faster twitch muscle fibers into more hybrid variations or slower twitch into a hybrid variation, etc., depending on the time course of training, etc. Now, a lot of the talk around training fast twitch muscle fibers is to try and preserve these type 2X muscle fibers, the ones that contract the fastest, the most powerful fibers. However, we likely don't want to really preserve type 2X muscle fibers because they fatigue so quickly. Sure, if you're a pure power athlete, sprinter, jumper, thrower, etc., that makes sense. You're doing one event, you're doing one hard output and you're done. Whereas a combat athlete, you have to go 5 to 10 minutes or 3 to 10 minutes or longer and have to repeat outputs over and over. So if you're having to repeat outputs, having a high proportion of type 2X muscle fiber probably isn't that advantageous. But luckily for us, there's a shift that happens when we start strength training or just training in general. So I'm gonna go through some of the research here that I have on my computer, but a study that influenced my master's research. It's by Anderson and his colleagues in 2005. It is titled Changes in the Human Muscle Force Velocity Relationship in Response to Resistance Training and Subsequent Detraining. So they took subjects through 3 months of strength training. They found that type 2X muscle fiber proportion decreased from 5.6% to 0.8%, while type 2A muscle fiber increased from 34 to 39.4%, so a 5% increase. And it's not an isolated finding, we see this all over the research. So Rao and his colleagues in 2004, they found 4 weeks of concentric or eccentric only training. So they did 4 sets of 8 leg extensions at 75 to 80% 1RM. So it wasn't true, I guess, eccentric overload. It was just done off concentric 1RM. And that led to a shift of type 2X muscle fibers towards the hybrid type 2A, type 2X. Anderson and his colleagues again in 1994, they found sprint preparation training. So sprinters preparing for competition, essentially they were training 2.5 to 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, and this included heavy strength training as well, in the 1 to 8 rep range, 80 to 100% of 1RM. And they shifted muscle fiber expression from type 1 and type 2X towards type A. So you see either end of the spectrum of the slower twitch and the very, very fast twitch kind of converging together, coming towards the hybrids and the type 2A variants. So essentially, increased activity from strength training and interval training, in this instance from these sprinters, led this shift in muscle fiber type. Now, we may have less shift towards type 2A based on a certain type of training. So if you're doing pure power-based training, you may attenuate some of the shift, and that is shown in Plotkin and colleagues' review in 2021. Muscle fiber type transitions and exercise training shifting perspectives. For example, ballistic and plyometric training with maximal strength training attenuated the loss in type 2X fibers compared to maximal strength training only. So potentially doing some form of ballistic, and by ballistic we mean something that's projectile, accelerated strength curves, so Olympic weightlifting, jumps, throws, and or plyometrics, which would be our very fast stretch shortened cycle off the ground, short ground contact times. That type of training along with heavy strength training may attenuate that change. Further, we see that well-trained athletes tend to not see such a dramatic shift in type 2X to type 2A. And there may be a genetic predisposition for being able to maintain or hold faster twitch muscle fibers, which comes back to my original point about people who have a genetic predisposition to a certain fiber type ratio may gravitate to sports they're good at because of that. Now, there's one interesting study that I'm aware of that implemented a 6-week training protocol that didn't see a decrease in type 2X muscle fiber type proportion. That is from Bogdanos and his colleagues in 2017. They took 16 university students through a low volume, fast eccentric and ballistic training program. So 3 days a week, they're 1 and 3 with fast eccentric squats. They basically did a cluster set, 6 sets of 1+1 with 30 seconds rest at optimal eccentric load, which was the load that produced the highest rate of force development or the highest forces in the shortest time periods, and plyometrics. Now, they weren't very good at explaining their methodology in the paper, but it sounds like it was 18 counter movement jumps or vertical jumps after they did that. And then day 2 was ballistic loaded jumps, 30% 1RM, 6 sets of 4. And then I believe, even though it's not well stated in the paper, that they did another 18 jumps after that as well, and this was body weight. So they found that muscle fiber distribution did not change post-intervention. Performance measures and muscle fiber hypertrophy did change, and those both improved. So the question is, does this muscle fiber type shift even matter? Because we see that Winchester and his colleagues in 2008, they completed 8 weeks of ballistic exercise. That was jump squats with 26 to 48% of 1RM for 3 sets, so around optimal power load, if you check out my video a few weeks back around that. There was no significant difference in muscle fiber distribution. However, the training group compared to the control group significantly improved rate of force development and peak force, which suggests regardless of fiber type shift, we can see large increases in power. So if I was to sum up the research where fast twitch type 2X muscle fibers are maintained, this is how I'd interpret it. Lesser trained individuals perform a novel training stimulus for short periods within these research papers, which is 6 to 8 weeks, and they see large performance improvements as shown by increases in rate of force development and peak power. And this likely suggests that the time course isn't long enough to see changes in muscle fiber type, at least with these testing methods, and neural adaptations occurred first. So potentially a lot of the times when we don't see this fiber type shift because of a novel stimulus to untrained individuals over a short time course, typically we see that this shift occurs. And regardless if the shift occurs or not, you're still improving performance outcomes. And I would say that the shift is actually positive, going from the type 2X muscle fiber to a high proportion of hybrids in type 2A, because they are more fatigue resistant. And you need that fatigue resistance to be able to last an entire match and to be able to repeat these high intensity efforts. Now, Anderson and Agard, they have a great paper on this as well that fed some of my master's thesis. They theorized mechanical tensile load, so essentially forming these cross bridges in the muscle under high tension, may switch off or downregulate the type 2X muscle fiber gene while upregulating the type 2A gene. in all of the type 2 muscle fibers. And that's what they theorize is causing this shift towards these type 2A muscle fibers. And again, does maintaining type 2X muscle fiber really matter? Anderson and Agard make this point in their 2010 paper, Effects of Strength Training on Muscle Fiber Types and Size, Consequences for Athletes Training for High Intensity Sport. And I'm going to just read a passage from that. It's, from a functional point of view, the disappearance of myosin heavy chain type 2X, so the type 2X muscle fibers, with strength training may seem somewhat unfavorable, since this myosin heavy chain isoform has the fastest contraction velocity and the highest power production, and removal from the muscle should lead to a slowing and reduced power output of the muscle. Theoretically. So theoretically, that is the case when looking at individual fiber, but when looking at the capacity of the whole and intact muscle, this apparent slowing is, in most athletic settings, more than outweighed by the increase in contractile strength, power, and rate of force development of the trained muscle. So again, comes down to looking at things in isolation versus looking at things at whole. When we talk, a lot of times we talk about aerobic versus anaerobic exercise, or we're talking about strength versus hypertrophy versus power. There's no isolated quality you're gonna get out of training. Everything blends together. And this is just another example of that. We can't just target type 2X muscle fiber because of the size principle. The size principle means you always start the type 1s coming first, then as the force thresholds met, we get type 2A, then type 2X eventually when you have these very high force thresholds that need to be met. That size principle means that all the muscle fibers will be activated by the time you get to type 2X, as an example. And again, just muscle fiber type isn't the only thing that is influencing your performance. It's just one of those factors, and trying to preserve type 2X muscle fiber may not even matter in the long run, because all that matters is, are you able to produce more force, are you able to produce force more quickly, and then are you really good at your sport? So these things are kind of summed up pretty easily. Now, if you must try and preserve type 2X muscle fiber for whatever reason, maybe you're just playing around, there's a repeatable method for gaining more type 2X muscle fibers than you have right now sitting there. So you're sitting there, you have a certain proportion of type 2X muscle fiber. If you have been training or haven't been training, it's gonna be more or less. So this method is doing absolutely nothing, i.e. bed rest. And I know it sounds kind of weird, like you don't train, you somehow get faster. Yep, that's pretty much it. And it's an interesting phenomenon called the overshoot phenomenon, which became my research interest in my master's thesis, which I'll cover my paper in a little bit. But if we go back to the Anderson paper and his colleagues, it's the very first one I referenced in this video. But they did the 3 months training, but then they did 3 months of detraining. So they did the same test before the training, after the training, and then after the detraining. So 3 time points. And after that large shift towards type 2A, remember we went from 34 to 39% of type 2A muscle fiber proportion, and that 5% decrease in type 2X. The 3 month detraining caused type 2X muscle fiber proportion to shoot past the pre-intervention distribution. So at the end of the training, it was 0.8% of type 2X. And then after the detraining, we see 7.7% distribution towards type 2X. And at the very beginning, before any training, it was 5%. So we get this overshoot of type 2X muscle fiber towards these very, very, very fast phenotypes of fast twitch muscle fibers. We also see that the overall proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers, so all of them together, type 2A to type 2X, increased from 40.2 to 44.7%. So we had this shift away from slower twitch to faster twitch from doing absolutely nothing. And with this came a 14% increase in maximal unloaded knee extension speed. So think of a leg extension as fast as you can into a pillow, basically. So a 14% increase in the speed of that, greater force at faster velocities, and greater power at faster velocities. It was first discussed, I believe, by Anderson and Agard in 2000, who ran the same protocol. This is the overshoot, 3 months training, 3 months detraining. They went from approximately 9% distribution pre-training to 2% post-training of type 2X muscle fibers, and then shot way up to 17% post detraining. Now, the problem is, as an athlete, you can't go months without training. You can't just spend 3 months on the sidelines just so you can get a high proportion of type 2X muscle fiber and then expect to be able to perform in whatever sport it is. So with one of my research papers, I tried to induce an overshoot in a professional sporting setting. We didn't measure muscle fiber type because 1, it's too invasive, especially in a professional sporting context for a season. 2, it costs a lot of money. Those are the 2 main reasons, really. But what we did is we did a 21-day taper, and the skills and the conditioning stayed the same. So this was in professional rugby league in the NRL, for anyone who's around the Australia, New Zealand region. And we did it before the preseason. So it was 3 weeks before the season started. They were playing some preseason games. I had a cohort of the players essentially almost drop a lot of their strength training. So they still perform their skills conditioning on the field, but in the gym, instead of doing 3 to 4 gym sessions a week, they were doing 1 every 7 days, and we drastically cut the volume and just kept the intensity high. So it was a low volume, high intensity approach, power cleans, overhead squat, bench press, and bench pull. And they were around 3 sets of 3 to 3 sets of 5, and then high percentages of 1 RM. And so instead of measuring muscle fiber type, we actually measured the power, force, velocity profile during jump squats. And this was before how it was easy with, say, the MyJump 2 app and various software now. This was pre all of that with spreadsheets and all sorts of stuff. So if you see the podcast episode I did with JB Marin, you have to go back a few, not too far, but he was one of the authors on my paper because he helped us with the data analysis around that data in particular. So the idea was, if we saw a spike in velocity after this 21-day tapering period, we could assume that fast twitch muscle fiber distribution was increased. So we could kind of use velocity as a proxy for muscle fiber type distribution in this instance. So what we found was significant improvements in force and power and jump height at 25, 50, 75, and 100% of body weight. So bar on the back and those percentages of body mass on the bar. And it suggests a few things. Resistance training volume seems to be more detrimental on force, velocity, and power than conditioning-based tasks. So also, what training is heavily emphasized before a taper or detraining period will likely improve most in a short taper period. So in this instance, there was a lot of heavy strength training, hypertrophy work done beforehand. So because that was the main focus, that is what recovered after the taper period. This is what I think is very practical for fighters. Now, forget about the overshoot and the Type 2X fiber distribution. The idea that resistance training volume may be more detrimental to your force, velocity, and power than the conditioning side, and that these players, professional athletes, were able to still improve these jump markers of force, power, jump height, etc. by drastically reducing their training volume. Probably means you could do the same leading into a fight. So 3 weeks out from a fight or tournament, you could theoretically completely drop your strength training volume, especially if you're doing a lot leading in, to once a week, super low volume, very high intensity. It could be a few jumps and throws, and it could be maybe 3 main lifts done for 1 to 3 sets of 1 to 5 reps, and you do that once a week. One, that gives you more time to do your tactical training, more time for any conditioning you need to do, and more time to recover between your sessions as well. So that's definitely something that you could bring into your training, where about 3 weeks out, you completely drop a lot of your strength training volume to once a week. And that's where I believe this practically holds a lot. Now, potentially you could create an overshoot to more fast twitch muscle fiber types as well, which would be advantageous because it's not just a Type 2X overshoot. And you'll be doing so much training, I don't think you will get that big Type 2X overshoot like we didn't see in the study, most likely, but you could potentially have a greater proportion of overall fast twitch muscle fiber type from that kind of taper. So bear that in mind. So if you're wondering how you can structure your strength conditioning leading into a fight, definitely something you can do is take out a lot of that strength training and just do once a week. But if you like this video, please let me know down in the comments. Also check out the MMA Strength Conditioning Blueprint, and I'll see you in the next video.